Well, then welcome everyone. Um, on my behalf and on SAR's behalf. Happy to see you here. We're gonna try to be very, it's gonna be more of a fireside chat than a real, masterclass presentation per se. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Martin Kalman, École des Ponts Business School, Director of Executive Education and Chaired Professor of the UNESCO Chair on the Future of Value here at the school. Maybe, Sarah, you can introduce yourself briefly, and then maybe it's worthwhile saying a couple of words about the school.
Of course. Well, firstly, it's good to have some familiar names and some new ones on this event. I know this is being shown both on Zoom as well as on LinkedIn Live. I'm not afraid with all the technicalities around it, but apparently it's possible to do two live events concurrently at the same time. So I've been told. It's exciting to be part of this technological marvel. But on a more serious note, my name is Saar Benatar. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ascent Growth Partners. For those who don't know us, we are a niche firm that focuses on strategic innovation and ecosystem building with offices in Singapore and in South Africa. That means I travel a lot, and really my passion has been to really help organizations together with business partners that we have, such as the École des Ponts Business School, to really bring innovation to life and to really help organizations think about what's really at the cutting edge of innovation as we kind of continue to push the envelope. That excites me. It gets me to meet some incredible individuals, practitioners in the field, all the way from China to the Americas, and in the process to host events such as this. So I'm really glad to be here. Just looking forward to all the questions and great conversations that will stir up. Let's spend the quality 1.5 hours together.
Mm. And speaking of which, so great segue actually, uh, innovation, and which is exactly what we're going to be talking about, but maybe also just a little bit of background on the school. So a niche consulting firm could only pair up, or not only, but would naturally pair up with a boutique business school. But what's interesting about us, rather than telling you all about, all our history and numbers and so on and so forth, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, I think maybe a short story is worth just as many. So we're actually the business school of one of the top engineering schools here in France, the École des Ponts. What's interesting here is that it's the École des Ponts actually, unlike most Anglo-Saxon universities that actually have the School of Engineering and the School of Humanities and the School of this and all of that, this is actually very unique. Engineering schools in France do engineering. Business schools in France do business school. This plurality is actually doesn't really exist much, which means that, hang on, I need to let someone in. Which means that actually the very fact that we exist is innovative in and of itself. And what's interesting is that this was created the business school was created in 1987. So it seems logical today and maybe not so surprising. It was very, very cutting edge at the time, very much bleeding edge, in fact. What's even more interesting is that it wasn't created by an engineer, a man. It was created by an Argentinian woman who came to France and decided that and was able to convince the engineering school to do this. And since then, so since 1987, we've been literally, and this has been our motto ever since, in business to make a better world. So I would say we try to embody still this, I don't know, credo of both innovation, but for a larger purpose. And I think our story, this little story, maybe illustrates nicely how we've been pushing the envelope ever since. And really happy to be working with SAR and with Ascent. It's always a story of humans and people connecting and relating. That's always the first step in any innovative venture.
Martin, should we say a few words about how we got to envision this program? Because this started with almost like a chance encounter that you and I had at the Dubai Future Forum. I think it was 2 years back. I'm
Mhm.
trying to think back. I mean, I've just come back from the 2025 edition of the forum, but for those who are not familiar with it, this is between 2.5 to 3,000 individuals that come together to have conversations about the future of innovation, the future of money. I think it's one of the panel discussions that Martin, you were at. And it got me really to think about how difficult sometimes it is for professionals like ourselves to collaborate on initiatives of magnitude, of impact. It's much easier, it seems, to be able to collaborate with teams within your immediate work environment, more familiar environment, the rules are known. Team members know each other, they know of what's allowed and not allowed. But when we look at the outcomes of closed innovation, what we often found, and I think this is one of our first conversations, before we could recognize the ecosystem that's around us, before we could really stretch ourselves further into the future and really envision a future that could be completely different to what the current practice of innovation is, that step from closed to collaborative innovation is not an easy one. It's not something that just happens by chance. And I remember some of our earliest conversations were more about the who. Who do we know? Who do we want to participate in this program? Who do we want to connect each other with? It became, to your earlier point, Martin, very much a human conversation of how do we get professionals to connect with one another. And it took a couple of months until we kind of all settled and got a little bit of a sense of who would contribute to this, who's really passionate about both innovation and collaboration. And it started a tempo, ongoing sessions where we kept pushing the conversation. We kept asking what's next and how do we practice this and how do we bring this to life? And how do we bring people from the edges of China on the one hand and the Americas on the other, very different cultures, very different regulatory regimes in many industries. How do we bring them together? And what kind of stands out for me the most is it continued to be, and still is to this day, a very rich, a very open and warm conversation. I think we were able to kind of surmount a lot of the pitfalls of organizations that are trying to collaborate with one another through that openness, through that trust building that happened throughout the process. So very much of a human to human connection that share I think both between ourselves and others who've joined the team since really share the passion for innovation and the kind of collaborations that we see the world really needs, whether those are cross-sector, whether those are across disciplines. I now see, futurists working with go-to-market professionals. That's not an easy match. And it's so nice to see that. And I can kind of only reflect back and say, I think we've put people or humans at the center of this enterprise. Um, and that's what kind of got us here. I think it's about a year and a half in the making, kind of all to all.
And I think to your point, it's what brought us together was also how do we actually make a difference? Because I mean, innovation everybody talks about all day long, and you can watch about 1 million videos on the latest, this innovation model, that innovation model, and open innovation, closed innovation, disruptive innovation, and so on and so forth. What I think brought us together as well is, well, what is that spark that goes from an idea, um, not just to making that an idea reality, but actually how does that idea spark the new ideas that haven't been had yet? And that's the peer learning, that's the exchange, that's where the magic happens. And we'll speak about, I think, to a little bit later, but that was also very much central to what we tried to create together, because we could take the business school approach of saying, okay, we can teach the business the innovation models, or we can take the consulting approach, which is about, well, we can implement them for you. And how do we create something different? How do these two approaches come together and in a collaborative way actually write a news story?
Mhm. No, that's fantastic. I just want to remind our audience, you can participate in the conversation by sharing your thoughts, your questions on the chat window. We'll have a Q&A in the last 35 to 40 minutes of the call. So please add all your questions, everything you ponder, everything you wanted to know about collaboration and innovation and how they come together. We might even ask some of you to join in the conversation and even share from your insights and learnings in the field. So please do that. Um, Martin, I'm kind of wondering, one of the concepts that we spent a lot of time in at the beginning of this process, before we even knew we're going to call this collaborative innovation, was what happens when organizations lose the spark? So they have an innovation function, I bet you, and they've got agile teams running all over the business, hopefully adding value, not creating mayhem, sometimes both. But the organization as a whole, when you actually ask, truth to heart, a lot of organizations out there have lost their spark. They've lost that kind of early entrepreneurial zeal that got them to what they are, to that dominant, influential position that they find themselves in. Many find themselves unable to reinvigorate that entrepreneurial spark. Um, and there's a sense of drift that kind of permeates the organization. Sometimes you got to say it, and people then point and say, "Yes, that's the word. That's what happened to us." While we weren't watching, while we were chasing quarterly targets, shareholder mandates, board directives, a change in CEO that in these days is happening far too often. I think the average these days is less than 2 years, average tenure. That drift can have a marked impact on an organization. So before we kind of delve into what is collaborative innovation, how is it different, what are some of the practices that we've seen and worked with that we would like to share with participants and let them experience, maybe let's talk about a little bit about when that doesn't happen, when innovation stays closed, when that spark gets dimmer and dimmer, and ultimately at some point doesn't get recognized by the business at all. Um, what do we call that? And how do we recognize that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I know this is an area that you're very passionate about and you speak often and teach on. So I wanted to kind of delve in there because I think creates a wonderful context for this conversation. The what if not? What happens then?
Well, thanks for that, and I'll share a couple of slides in just a minute. But before that, I think it's kind of interesting to talk a little bit about this thing that you've been talking about, which is strategic drift. That is also a word that is used a lot, and generally, the definition of strategic drift is, an organization kind of gets complacent, and the day to day takes over, and next thing you know, well, the market has moved and you're sitting high and dry, and the usual examples of the Kodaks of this world, and so forth are bandied about. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, as usual, and so I'm just going to share a couple of slides to maybe put it into context. No worries, it's 3 or 4 slides. It'll be quick. Um, uh, and but the first thing is that I think is important to put things into perspective is just so that everybody knows what I'm talking about. Have you? Sorry, I'm just trying to get this as well. There we go. Um, the I'd like to just comment for a couple of seconds. The framework I'm going to be using is the three horizon framework. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but just to avoid that everybody knows where I'm coming from. Basically, strategic fit, which is the opposite of strategic drift, this model says that strategic fit on one axis and time on the other, there is actually different time horizons, three time horizons basically. First, second, and third, short, medium, and long. But what's more interesting here is that we tend to use strategic planning and crisis management in the first horizon, and we tend to forget that you actually need other tools to start dealing with the second and third horizon. We tend to just kind of say, well, we've done the strategic planning, let's just kind of expand it, not understanding that it's actually a different function. It's something different. And now to come back to the point of what is strategic drift, in my opinion, well, I think we tend to forget that strategic drift really is related to these three horizons. Is that the first horizon, the first level of strategic drift is an operational one. Is when we get so caught up in operations, that's where the complacency often comes, is that you're just trying to, you forget to align strategy and operations because the strategy, like so often gets said, just gets eaten up by the day-to-day. And by trying to be more efficient, trying to solve the next little problem. And the net result is that you get a strategic drift that is actually operationally driven. The second one happens at the executive level team. The point is that rather than trying to identify blind spots and potential opportunities and threats, what the executive team is doing is trying to implement the strategy that has been decided upon. We have the right strategy, forget what's happening around us, this is what we need to implement. And so, of course, these two feed off each other. And the third level of strategic drift happens at the boardroom, actually. And that's when actually, instead of, once again, trying to identify what the conditions of change are, what is happening out there, what are the big trends, what's really changing, what do we need to be, what was true today, what is true today but may no longer be true tomorrow, and that's when you get caught into or caught up in a strategic drift that is actually the deeper sense of strategic drift. That is, I am not adapting my strategy to the overall market. Let's make the link from this perspective to innovation. So what happens, in my opinion here, and this is what some of the things we'd like to talk about with SAR and in our collaborative innovation space, is that, well, when you're looking at innovation from an operations perspective, you're actually just problem solving. That is the typical space of closed innovation. It can be brilliant, actually. It doesn't mean you're not going to come up with some pretty incredible technical innovations or potentially even process innovations, but you're in a problem-solving frame of mind, which is actually very limited and limiting. For the executive team, the strategic drift is actually limited to opportunity spotting. That's open innovation. A step up, you're looking more widely, you're looking for the mega trend, you're looking for what is my blind spot, what is that potential hidden opportunity that I can go to. Great. But there again, it is actually framed in a specific problematic. And where we would like to take you, and I've kept the board level, but of course this is much broader than that because an ecosystem is by definition broader. But then again, that's what a board is supposed to do. The board is supposed to bring in perspectives from a broader perspective. But that's where we believe the magic happens, because that's where the changing conditions of change can be identified. And that's where you enter into the third time horizon, where suddenly collaborative innovation happens, where it's no longer about just the company, it's no longer just about problem solving or finding the next big thing or the next opportunity or the next strategy that's going to function for us. It's actually building those deeper connections, those collaborative possibilities that otherwise just get eaten up, either by just trying to get my strategy to work, or just trying to implement and operationalize it.
Martin, can I maybe just test something with you as you're kind of describing this? And I know during the program we spent an entire session and quite a bit of pre-work, individual pre-work that happens to really anchor this concept of strategic drift. I had this encounter earlier today with one of our clients, and it was a session that I was participating online in, as I'm still traveling. And the way they described strategic drift is that we no longer question where we are. In other words, we forgot where we are. And the context when they said that was that they set a target to themselves for their next 5 year strategy cycle. Um, to regain some of their market share. And obviously, I'll use some of the identifying elements of the story. Some of your audience may actually recognize them. And they said, we want to, they're now between, in the top five, say in the industry. And they said, within 5 years, we want to go back and become number two. And when we had the session with them around drift, what happens in drift and what changes in your mindset? The result is that you stop questioning where you are. And when they started looking at the statement and said, hang on, there's something very strange here. Who decided that being number two is the goal? Who said,
You went on mute.
apologies, who said that that is a worthy aspiration for our business? While we got busy problem solving in the operational space and meeting targets and hurdle rates, what we ended up doing is we stopped questioning where we are. And we
Yeah,
found ourselves in a space that we never agreed to be in. We
yeah.
never bargained for. We never negotiated for this. We never called this success. But being number two isn't exciting at all. And the
Mm.
minute we ask the question, so what happens if you aim for something unique? What happens when you aim for something that's different? That you're no longer trying to replicate what other organization has done, and therefore most likely become number two in the market. And that's the best case scenario, by the way. When you run a few scenarios with them, that is not definitely not the worst. And that's where the conversation shifted completely because they became self-aware as an organization, not as individuals, not as a team, but as an organization. Suddenly, the executives were actually listening in to what various teams in what you would call operations were actually conversing with each other about what's the meaning of being number two. And the most telltale sign was that the executive in charge, who was supposed to be in the meeting only for the first 20 minutes, just to open up the session, and then he was so busy he had to go somewhere else. He was there, Martin, for 3 hours, for the entire 3 hours. For me, that's the kind of self-awareness that happens when we recognize that we actually are in a drift. So I just thought I'll share this because as you were describing the distinguishing features of strategic drift, it made me realize that's exactly what we saw earlier today.
Yeah. And the point, and which you illustrate beautifully in this example, is that I would even say that there is the third level is when the organization already they've gone from operational to executive level, so from operations to understanding themselves as an organization and what the organization aspires to. And then the next step to collaborative or to ecosystemic is to understand, well, where do we fit in a much broader system? And then you can really start playing with the conditions of change once again, rather than just being tributary to the conditions of change. Not that you can affect change, you can manipulate all the conditions of change. There are some that are just given, but actually, oddly enough, when one actually starts unpacking them, uh, we gain a lot of agency. And there are a lot of levers that we didn't even consider because they were literally not visible to us because not directly part of the organization or not directly available to us. You're on mute, I'm afraid.
Apologies. That's occupational hazard.
But I really think because you've done a lot of work around this, you've done a lot of work both with your clients, but also, and we've both been traveling around quite a bit, talking to various ecosystems. Actually, maybe before we actually jump into, I'd love to hear you on actually defining the difference between closed, open, and collaborative innovation. And we've got a slide for that. Does anybody in on the call, you can just unmute yourself. When we say collaborative innovation, what does that, you know, what does that mean to you? Does that mean anything to you? Is this just another buzzword, or have you heard this before? Do you have, how would you define it if you had to define it? Can I throw the gauntlet down and make someone take the very courageous step of unmuting themselves? I guess not.
Hi there. Oh.
Ah, Amanda, thank you. Thank you for saving me, Amanda.
Hi. No, I just wanted to say that I haven't actually heard the term collaborative innovation, but as soon as you say it, it just is so it's so obvious that obviously you cannot have like true collaboration or, far-reaching sustainable collaboration. I mean, sorry, innovation without the collaboration aspect. So it just feels to me the way that you've shown from closed to open and then collaborative, it just feels like yeah, a no-brainer, although I hadn't named it like that before.
Thanks, Amanda. So, anybody else want to pitch in, or should we pretend we know what we're talking about and show a slide?
I'll throw something in.
Thank you.
For me, I immediately think about the challenge of collaboration within innovation, because in order to get true innovation, you need to have true collaboration, and navigating habits and kind of assumptions around that, as well as power dynamics, etc., can be quite challenging. And so I think it's quite an exciting dynamic that can keep you on the edge. And if you're brave and you stay on the edge, that's brilliant. But it really does require that you do that in order for it to be innovation, would be my opinion.
Thanks. I love it. Sar, do you want to share some of our
Sure.
thinking?
So I'd really want to latch on to both what Amanda and Lazan have said, because you really kind of focused in on such a critical part of collaborative innovation. And I'm going to try to kind of pull this together in terms of mindsets. So effectively, what we found takes place in organizations. We've recently studied 34 organizations that engage in innovation and the practices that they use. And what we found is that with closed innovation, in other words, this is innovation that happens within and by teams within your organization. You may, on occasion, collaborate with others, but the underlying mindset is very much what we term a user mindset, because the overall ecosystem you believe is outside of your control or influence, because the brief is known, it was given by executives within your organization, the mandate is clear, because there's often an overappreciation of the capabilities that the organization has to innovate. And very often, some of the measures that gets used internally within the organization can be rather fuzzy. Ultimately, you might revert to simply more literally controlling budgets for innovation activities. What happens as a result is that the underlying mindset is very much a user mindset. We collaborate with others because we have to. We collaborate with others for a particular intent. And once we finish collaborating with them and we got what we wanted out of the collaboration, well, it's no longer needed. You see that very much in very kind of established supply chains, channel relationships, for example, in financial services, just as one example. When open innovation was first introduced, the mindset changed. And the mindset was really around, could we start the process more collaboratively? Could we ideate together? Crowdsourcing, for example, was one of the first methods that were used in open innovation. And the underlying mindset behind it was more of an open mindset. Let's figure out whether others could add to our ideas. Let's figure out whether others could bring capabilities that we may not have. if we would put all of us into a room together, would we come up with a different idea? Collaborative innovation really takes that evolution a step further, and I believe a very significant step further, because the underlying mindset is that of a collaborative and a curious mindset. In other words, what happened with collaborative innovation, you look at the ecosystem as a whole and you ask yourself, what is a set of possibilities that if we were to have the right collaborators, partners, capability sets, talent, etc., wherever they may be, inside our organization, outside of it, connected to us, unconnected, possibly industry rivals, competitors, some might even be in the regulatory space. If that was available to us, what could we achieve? What impact could that have? What second order effects would then become available? We do a lot of our work in emerging markets where financial inclusion, for example, is a very big topic. And as a result of it, very often you've got to think ecosystemically about the problem that you're solving. Otherwise, you're just adding a product that already exists with new features. So for me, that's that shift in mindset from closed to open to truly ecosystemic, and therefore, by definition, collaborative, is really at the heart of this. And the results that we see are very much as we measure the performance of these ecosystems. One of the reasons you may wonder as to why our Immersion Week takes place in China, at least for this next cohort. And the reason for it is because in China, we found more often than not, and certainly more distinctly than other countries around the world, with very few exceptions. There are some, but they're few and far between. We find that the ecosystem building aspect is far more pervasive in China, certainly in areas such as communication, ICT more broadly, mobility, and automotive more recently, and certainly more in the news, but also in some lesser known areas like manufacturing, for example, like household goods. Fuad, I know that when we met in China not too long ago, just a couple of months ago, it was very much at the behest of a major Chinese manufacturing organization. And it was a wonderful opportunity to have conversations around how did the Chinese build ecosystem and to the depth that they build ecosystems. So for me, that's really the shift. And when we compare the results of what the ecosystem can achieve, it is significantly more than if we had to practice closed innovation. I'm just going to say one more thing around this, and maybe this is just kind of me adding to the more recent noise around market concentration. So let me kind of add one more layer to this. We could have had the same explanation 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even. What I'm most worried about with closed innovation is if it's done in the context of industry concentration that is unhealthy, where very few firms hold not just internal power, market access, capital pools, talent, sometimes monopolizing talent networks. What we find in a lot of these industries is that there's very little outside competition. We know of the Magnificent Seven in the United States. There is a similar list of organizations in China. In that context, closed innovation can deliver results that are very much not based on market performance or their innovation capabilities. It is really delivered through market concentration, and that has huge risk associated with it. And that's also one of the reasons why we are promoting the concept of collaborative innovation and have built this program. So wherever you are in the world and are ever concentrated your industry is, you can envision the shape of your innovation ecosystem. You can spot where the major role players are or could be, and therefore you can respond differently way before we reach a situation that we're now seeing in some industry sectors where it's a handful of firms that control entire industries. And that puts the ability to innovate at grave risk. So I'm just going to throw that in as a last point because it's really topical and it isn't happening. It is happening in front of our eyes.
Yeah. I love that, Sarah, thanks, because it also really speaks to one of the fundamental points we are talking, and you've said this, but I'd like to just, really double click on it, it speaks to the fact that this is a mindset shift. Because we were talking about strategic drift. What you're talking about there is about industry sector drift.
Hmm.
And
Exactly.
this concentration leads directly to there. And it is just, it is just the natural consequence, an inevitable, I would say, consequence of not having an ecosystemic approach, which is, to a certain extent, it's contrary to market standards. You want concentration, you want power, you want to own that innovation and that IP and that access to market, whatever. And so it does require, and you'll see in a minute, we'll talk a little bit about this. It really does require that there's a deep mindset shift that I think is also, and this is a personal belief. I don't have the research to back this, but I believe this. I really think that this is a necessary step if we are to actually be able to start really addressing the planetary challenges that we're facing, because they are ecosystemic by definition. And so until we actually understand that the innovation necessary is ecosystemic, and therefore we can start thinking ecologically in the ecological sense, like an ecology is an ecosystem. So we can actually really start thinking ecologically rather than just, once again, either paying lip service to sustainable development and regenerative this or that, which happens a lot. I won't name any names, but actually this is if we were to give a why to what we're doing, the deeper why, I think both Sarah and I share quite deeply, is very much in that area.
Yeah. And Martin, that is not to say that firm level strategy doesn't matter. It's not to say that competitive advantage has gone off the rails. It just balances that perspective of the firm with the aspirations of individuals to innovate, to create new solutions, to create greater impact, and to build their own networks. And it's very sad sometimes to see those individuals leave firms that stay closed and do not allow their aspirations to evolve. We won't mention names. We'll just talk about the head of AI for Meta as an example, because it's out there in the press, right? But it's a very sad state that he had to leave the organization because the organization wouldn't adapt its mindset around where AI could evolve into and how it could more productively aid humanity rather than abuse our intellectual capacity and need for socialization. So,
Absolutely.
just as one example.
Yeah. And I think it's it's very reductive to think to say that competitive advantage and collaboration are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think there are plenty of examples. I mean, Shenzhen is one of them, and the area in Shenzhen is clearly one of them. If we tie it back to to China and as our first, how do you say, focus point. But there are many more. Speaking of which, maybe Sart, do you want to talk a little bit about our program?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about the China Immersion as an element of. I know this is a three-part program, as a certificate program. It is more than just a visit. But let me kind of talk a little bit about the visit and why we felt that was so important, and how we think we could visit, learn from, learn with, and converse with innovation champions in that part of the world. So what we've seen, and maybe let's talk about the current state for a moment, is China is a case study, to learn from, to learn with ecosystem building, and the kind of ecosystemic innovation that we're talking about is almost unrivaled. It is a market of very significant proportions where firms can grow very broad and deep ecosystems without going beyond borders, which is not easy to do, certainly in much smaller emerging markets. China is also different in the way in which it's almost programmatically looked at industries in transition, think energy and the digitization of energy, and the shift in vehicle production towards new energy vehicles. That is almost unrivaled. Very few countries have been able to programmatically look at key industries and say, what will the future of smart energy look like by 2035 or by 2040? How do we work our way back? What's the role of critical minerals in it? I'm just using one industry example. They've been able to do the same across a number of very significant sectors of the economy. And to be honest, when you find yourself in parts of the world like Europe, or even where I stay in Africa, you are the receiving end of it. Because they're able to leverage that very significant size of their local economy and the way that they programmatically have envisioned, anticipated, and are working towards a shape of the ecosystem that most Western firms haven't thought about, or certainly have not vocalized to a degree that their partners could actually understand and say, okay, I'm willing to put capital and talent behind it. And I think the third thing that makes China really unique in a way is how diverse it is. And that only struck me when I visited China for a number of times. The first visit, I didn't get it. But as you visit more and more and more time, Hong Kong is very different to Shenzhen. Shenzhen is very different to Qingdao. Qingdao is very different to Beijing. And I can go on and on and on and on. Um, just in surveying the top 10 innovation ecosystems, the broadest city size ecosystems that exist in China, they're all different. They're all different in their technology focus. They're all different in the way that they draw talent into those areas, and certainly engage external talent, Western talent, talent from other parts of Asia. And that richness, that these multiple experiments that are taking place, doesn't guarantee that all of them are going to win, but they make for wonderful learning partners. Imagine sitting in a room with Chinese innovators who are grappling with similar innovation challenges to what you are. We have similar ambitions, perhaps, and can envision the industry going in a different direction to what it was for the last 30, 40, 50 years. But because of the industry context and because they're living in China, the way they would tackle some of these innovation challenges will be different. And for me, the cornerstone of this program is really to bring those individuals in conversation. The amount of time I have to profess that we had to have multiple conversations just to get organizations in China, sometimes in the West, to say, can we just have an evening of conversation, peer-to-peer exchange, walls down, let's just have the conversation. Let's just understand the challenge. For example, of contracting new suppliers to build a product that we've never built before, an ecosystemic solution, for example, just to be able to have that conversation. A lot of the time and effort actually went into bringing them into the room and bringing and developing the trust levels to a degree where people would say, okay, I won't speak to you in a formal setting about how that looks like in our organization, but if we do it informally over dinner, I can share a few things. And for me, that peer-to-peer exchange is at the center. At the moment, what we see, lots of trips to China. There's no shortage. If you really want to visit China and you want to do it soonest, I can give you a list of 20 business schools, research, government bodies and associations that are sending people by the hordes to China. But we see all the wrong behavior. We see this almost this hectic schedule that's almost inhumanly possible to keep up with. It's almost like speed dating. You never get to really know a person, let alone an organization and their method of innovating. And very often you leave with two different opinions, almost kind of on opposite sides of the divide. We wanted to do this differently. We wanted to do it in a much more collaborative fashion, at a slower pace, where we don't have to rush and spend more time traveling between one city to the next, but rather to spend more time in a few ecosystems that we were able to build trust, engender trust within, and therefore have the right and deeper conversations. And to be able to do it with kind of an eye-to-eye conversation. So if you're looking for an academic to lecture to you about Chinese innovation practices, I'm very happy to point you in that direction. There are a stack load of them, and some are really good at what they do. We wanted to do something different that's much more practitioner to practitioner, that's much more eye level to eye level conversations. And that's where we feel the connection will be made. And that's where we think the spark of possibly collaborating with them happens much more likely. Martin, well, what stood up for you in the kind of in the
Yeah,
construction
I
of this
think you said it
program?
beautifully. So I think I'm curious to hear the feedback and also any questions, because I really think you described it beautifully of our conversations and what we really are trying to achieve. This is not just another study trip to China. This is really we've really been trying to do something very, very different, collaborative by design, so to speak. Um, um, so maybe just open it up to any questions you might have, any specifics you might want to know about, or just the questions that we've that what we've said has brought up.
I would love to hear from our audience if they were on this innovation immersion in China. What would they like to see the most? We've got our top 10 list. We've worked hard at it. We've taken some things off the list where we felt it wouldn't suit this kind of program or derail the kind of deep learning that we are looking for. But I'd love to hear from people in the audience. What would they like to see, inquire most on? That'll be really valuable. Again, we're asking for brave souls, huh?
You just have to unmute yourself, and there you go. Sounds like we've said it all.
Or perhaps, Martin, you might want to give the outline, perhaps,
Yeah.
and maybe that will spark some thoughts on this.
Yeah. So in terms of structure, the idea here is that we don't go in cold turkey. So fly in, fly out, and visit as many companies and get the company, kind of the party line. Sorry, given China, that's probably not the right expression, or maybe it is the right expression. Um, uh, so the idea is that before we go, we're going to have a collab together of all the participants, where we're going to lay a little. Sar said that it's not going to be lecture heavy, but it doesn't mean there is no lecture. So provide a few tools, provide a few frameworks, provide a little bit of context, and especially start building trust. Because the point is also that the group will be able to have the trust, have the depth of connection necessary, well, to potentially ask the difficult questions and address the real challenges, not what we tell people in a dinner conversation. That's going to happen about 2-3 weeks before the actual immersion. Then we have a 5-day trip in China. There again, the idea is to have in-depth connections, talks with our Chinese counterparts. There will be a little bit of because that's also part of the what's required, so to speak. There will be some company presentations, but every time what we're trying to do is that we're trying to architecture or organize and articulate conversations. So either officially, some can take place relatively officially, or unofficially, because like Sar said, some need to take place unofficially. And then after each one of these, there is a real moment of talking, exchanging, thinking together. What have I learned? What were the challenges that were raised? How can this relate to my own situation, and potentially what business opportunities are out there? This is not. This is also, I think, in a very open way, something that we're going to try and do. So there's a whole throughout these 5 days, we're really trying to develop dialogue and conversations amongst the group and with the partners that we're going to be visiting. And these are partners, by the way. These aren't just companies that, we've asked a local partner to call and that we're getting a meeting with. These are people with whom we actually have in-depth conversations. In fact, we very much hope that we will have a few Chinese participants as well, so that we can also have that really cross-cultural bridge building. And then at the end, because once again, once you come back, then the whole point is, well, what do I do with all this experience, knowledge, new contacts? At the end, a few weeks after that, we have another collab where we actually then together try for each one of you, try to actually draw the roadmap, so to speak, or at least turn some of these insights into some kind of a roadmap, some kind of a project, some kind of an experiment to test. And I hope and I trust Sar on this. He's remarkably good at this. But I hope that this is the first step in creating another ecosystem, a cross-cultural, cross-national, cross-sectoral ecosystem, where, well, this whole notion of collaborative innovation actually lives on over time. And that's really, so in brief, that's the vision, so to speak.
Martin, I have a question from my side, and that is, for those in the audience who've either been interacting with Chinese organizations or even more broadly in Asia, one of the things that one must tackle in any cross-border venture, whether we are co-innovating or whether this is more in the execution or the operation side, is there are sometimes significant cultural differences. There are language issues, etc., etc. Some of the so-called softer elements. I'd love to hear from those who have had the experience of working across the East-West divide, and I'll just call it East-West divide for now. There's probably a better word for it. I'll have to learn it. As to what is it in what they see that they would like to deepen their understanding of the most. For example, some people in this morning's conversation spoke about a deep concern for the geopolitical divide and the kind of trading blocks that could come up. That on their side required innovation. It required management innovation. It required them to not just think about the right strategy, but be able to create more flexible structures that could deal with fast changing trading blocks. They don't represent what exists today. We spoke about trading blocks in the global south that could draw on some of those Chinese ecosystems. And this is a commercial organization of significant size that was working through this exercise. So for them, when they spoke about some of the softer elements, it was really around understanding the nuances around geopolitics and international tensions and how those play into how these firms think, how they make decisions. Ultimately, we can't sit on the fence the entire time and just hope for things to die down. We have to make conscious decisions about who do we partner and collaborate with next. Who from a technology perspective would enable our next wave of growth, etc., etc. So I'd love to hear from the audience, especially those who have been to the region and who or had the pleasure of working with organizations from Asia and particularly from China, as to what they found. I see Eamon has just joined us. We might even throw the question at him because he's been involved in international co-innovation efforts for quite a few years. Eamon, I'm not sure if you were able to hear my question, or should I do a quick recap?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes, I wasn't
Okay.
sure whether
So yeah, you
heard
need
the
to do
question.
a quick recap
A
because
quick
I had
recap.
to exit LinkedIn and come join through this one.
No, not a
I've been
problem.
here.
Yes.
And I
So,
do have
so
a comment about from an earlier question as well, which I wanted to add, but I'll see.
sure, sure. Maybe do that first, and then I'll pose the question if that's okay.
Yeah, about so collaboration, again, this is from first-hand experience. I think when people talk about innovation, sometimes I know it's become, it's been the last few years as a buzzword and innovation. Of course, innovation is always there. It's always existed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have cars, we didn't have equipment, we didn't have airplanes, etc. I think the difference in the last, decade or so is the pace of change. The pace of change is being significant. We never had anything like this. And just going back to my role when I was working in innovation at British Petroleum and in the technology. So what was happening is the technology aspects and components of the technology, like IBM, Amazon, they were developing a lot of fancy technology, nice technology, but they didn't have a business case. They were literally, I mean, if you think about Watson, what was Watson doing for years? Just playing chess, stuff like that. And and you got consultancies, you got academia, everyone is doing in a bit, but because of the pace, I think I wouldn't say we were forced. I think it's a fortunate coincidence is we found ourselves going and collaborating. I found myself working with people, companies like technology companies and consultancy companies. Oh, because even consultancy companies, they didn't have looking, to previous years where they have everything you want to know about, you want to get involved in, you want to develop strategy, etc. They've already done something here or there, so they can always give you that. But it wasn't. So we were almost, like I said, not forced, but in a way, it fortunate. We started to collaborate, creating an ecosystem. And that's the sort of basis of what we have now. That's what's continuing. And I think it's what's nice. I have spoken to you about this program, is putting a sort of structure around it and put a focus, a spotlight on the collaboration. But I was just basically wanted to say how it started, and it will have to continue because the pace is phenomenal. It's just like 3 years ago people guessing about AI. Now you talk about kids that are reducing chat GPT and using all aspects of AI. So it is important to highlight that point. So that was what I was gonna say. Um, Now, if you want to go back, if you have any comments, or if you want to, you said you wanted to ask me something.
Well, I guess let me ask the question differently. I mean, thank you firstly for sharing from your experience. And I guess my question would be, and please, Martin, feel free to add to this, is in working in innovation, particularly in collaborative innovation, where you knew
Yeah,
fairly much upfront that this would require the collaboration of others significantly and systemically. This is
yeah,
not a once-off. We're not just using them to get to a particular technology or a particular model
correct.
or market access. Um, we very often come across the softer elements of culture,
Mm,
of leadership,
yeah,
um, of sometimes missing the nuances in the conversation. When it comes to East-West,
yeah,
collaborative innovation, it's even
yeah,
more enhanced. And I guess my question would be, um, you know, having worked in this space, what would you like to see the most in this program that would, in your view,
mm,
enhance participants' experience here? The last thing I want to do is just throw
yeah,
more books at you or
yeah,
throw more content. There's
of course.
sufficient amount. The opportunity
Yeah,
is
so
really to sit with practitioners in the field, and I'd love if you were there in one
yeah,
of the evenings. What
yeah.
would you ask? What would you pose or contribute
So
to the
I
conversation?
think to me and is again talked about the pace, the expedition of results. Experiment, show some results. So don't make it as an academic. I'm not saying you're doing, but it's like you gotta spend time listening, and all of this and sort of absorbing. And I think it will have to be. It's almost the whole cycle very shortened from have, you listen to something, you get your hands dirty in something, try to do something, see some results, show those results. Of course, we're talking about a miniature scale, but that will start to get the individuals involved, almost their eyes open up. It's like, oh, I actually, I'm liking this. I want to do more of that. But also, those individuals that say in this program, they have to go back and talk to other people. Somebody paid for them to be there, or whatever aspects of that. They need to be able to demonstrate something, not in a theoretical way. Hello?
Yes, yes, you with us?
Okay, sorry. I thought I lost you. Not in a theoretical way, but in a practical way. And I think that is the challenge I could give you there is how can you create something by the end of this, there is something tangible that people can take back with them to not to just to talk. Oh yeah, we had a good demonstration. Oh yes, we spoke to this company, we spoke to this amazing person or this scientist. No, it's we did that, but look what we've brought back in, and we can demonstrate something like relevant to the corporate, to the individual, to the company, etc.
Martin, this might be a really good time maybe to just to walk through the program and just to give a sense to those who might be thinking about participating or in some way collaborating with of what does it look like, and then I'll add to Eamon's point a bit more about the second collab and where does that kind of shaping of an innovation ambition take place, and how do we see they can bring something tangible to others who've sent them on the program or have somehow have expectations that the program delivers something unique or different for them. I'm happy to do that.
Well, like I said a little bit before, so this is basically the program is basically set up. We're finalizing the dates. It's going to be probably beginning of March of next year. It's basically going to be one session to build trust, one initial collab to build trust, start exploring what this concept of strategic drift is, get some of the context of the visits we're going to be going to, and also learn to know each other. Then 5 days in China. And then another collab, which I'll let you speak to a little bit in greater detail, in order to then tease out and turn into practical. Like I said before, is that a roadmap? Is it an experiment? Is it a business venture? Is it? To your point, Ayman, it's getting your hands dirty. It's coming back and actually, opening up the engine and start fiddling with the engine and see what comes out. And then a much longer tail, which then lasts over time, of the possibility of actually continuing to build and interact with this community. Not to mention that this is not a sales pitch actually, but it's actually part of the logic. Then this is a China immersion, but there are so many more immersions to do. China is not the end all and be all. There are so many other geographical or ecosystemic immersions to do that we will then later, as the time goes on, come back to you and actually also get from you what is the next visit that we'd want to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, by the way, because absolutely, it is planting the seeds is going to happen there, and you start to see the plant to show, but absolutely, it's the continuation on the support post that absolutely very important and very essential to the actual development and being able to achieve big results and measure results. I would have, yeah, I'm glad you said it. I would have expected this as an integral part of the program, because otherwise you go back to your day job and things is just move on. It's absolutely not the point.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me expand a bit on the second collab, because so what happens when we come back from China? I promise you won't be overly or completely exhausted and can't remember the names of the cities that you were at, because we're planning at 2, 3 cities at most, not 7 cities in 5 days. We're not going to attempt to inflict that kind of harm on anyone, certainly not on the participants and our friends who joined the program. But for me, the one of the most crucial activities actually take place when we come back. And let me pose it as a question. Very often when I ask people who we work with, what is your innovation ambition? You very often get a response that is anything but what the ambition is. So some individuals might say things like, well, I can't actually share, I have a view of the ambition, but I can't actually share it with colleagues. I can't share it in my organization. And, we won't get eartime for this. Or it goes against our stated strategy. I know there's a gap here. I know that if we do nothing different, things will go from bad to worse, but I can't share it in its current form. Very often people will say things like, for example, they'll ask a question back. They'll say, well, how do I know if it's ambitious enough? How do I know that it's really pushed the edges of the ecosystem and it's not just kind of my grand design? So there's a lot of anxiety that often accompanies the development of an innovation ambition. And with that in mind, our sense was that we use the second collab to really help participants to really give shape and in some cases revisit what their innovation ambition is. But this time, from the perspective of the future, from an ecosystemic stance, and having seen firsthand and learned about some of the innovation practices that collaborative innovation calls for. And my sense is that the kind of innovation ambition they'll come up with, I think will be something that they'll be more confident speaking to with their organizations. I'm not promising it will be bigger for that matter. It may just be different. It may be clear. It may be more meaningful to them. It may be something, and I've been writing often recently about, it might just be something worth writing home about. And for that purpose, they'll be working closely with a coach that will be assigned to them right at the beginning of the program, not just in the second collab, right from the beginning. And they'll be able to tap into a community of innovators who've participated in the program, who have given us permission to visit their companies, their factories, their innovation labs, and ultimately that they'll be able to test with colleagues when they go back home. So that's really what the second collab is about. It's really about you as a participant and giving you some of the tools and the methods by which you can have a more confident and a more precise conversation about what that innovation ambition is. And if there's something that I'd love to impart on is when you see someone who is clearly passionate about innovation, clearly passionate about what they can deliver, and it's those things that stand in the way that are making it difficult to have the conversation. And that's, to my extent, a lot of what the coaching will involve, really. So that's really a few more words about the second collab when we come back.
And well, maybe it's also we've gone a little bit over time. If you have any final questions, we'd love to take them for those of you. And if not, it's been a real pleasure to have you all.
Martin, we will share with those who've registered for this event the program outline and a link if you're interested to know more and speak to us or register from what you've heard so far. We'd love to have the conversation with you. But otherwise, thank you for your precious time. Thank you for spending a part of, well, what is afternoon this side of the planet. I think for some of you, it might still be morning, at least one or two of you. I'm spotting by the name. I'm assuming you're back home. So wherever you are in the world, I'm really glad we had this opportunity to have the conversation and for some of you to participate back, either through the chat facility or through conversation and ask some really great questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Speak to you all soon, I hope.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.